Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Vanook, the Executive Director of Library Reads. Thank you so much for joining us for the very first Murder at the Library Book Club, brought to you by Sourcebooks and Baker and Taylor. I'm thrilled to be here with Julie Clark, author of The Last Flight. Born and raised in Santa Monica, California, Julie Clark grew up reading books on the beach while everyone else surfed. After attending college at the University of the Pacific, she returned home to Santa Monica to teach. She now lives there with her two young sons and a golden doodle with poor impulse control. Her most recent book, The Last Flight, was a Library Reads pick, an Indie Next pick, and it debuted on the New York Times bestseller list. Hi, Julie. It's great to talk to you today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
So let's dive right in to talk about your book, The Last Flight.
Okay.
So we've got questions from some of our previous audience members ahead of time, but I wanted to talk to you because I, of course, read the book and I have questions. It's very exciting to talk to an author about their books. So really, what we want to know: how did you come up with this idea? It's a very I think, one of the tropes I personally like in fiction is what would happen if you could just leave your whole life behind and, go become someone else and do something, which is always very funny to me because I have this great life, good family, good job, etc. I don't really want to leave it all behind, but boy, that is a big daydream of mine. And so reading this, I felt like, wow, here's these two women that get to just sort of disappear and leave it all behind. So what made you decide that's the story I want to write? How did you come up with the idea?
I think that I'm fascinated with that idea too, of really being able to step out of your life and start over somewhere else, leave all of your problems behind, your debt behind, your past behind, the people who have disappointed you behind, the people who have betrayed you or hurt you. But at what cost, So as a novelist, we're always thinking about, well, what would be the reason why somebody would do that? And it would need to be a good reason. I mean, I'm writing a thriller, so there needs to be an element of danger involved in some way. And so, I didn't want to write to kind of unsatisfied housewives or, somebody who just was sick of their job or whatever, because there's not really anything tense about that. It's interesting for sure. So I needed to come up with two people who had a desire and a desperate need to literally become someone else. And so I created Claire as someone who was running from an abusive and dangerous husband who was very powerful and not somebody that she could really speak out against for fear of being questioned and having her character pulled apart and just having it all play out in the media. Like, she just didn't really want to live through that. She just wanted to be done with him. And Eva, who is also being manipulated by powerful men in a very different way. And how she kind of got to be in that situation where she's having to run as well. Her life is also in danger. So having these two women sort of meet and interact and come up with this plan to switch plane tickets was the kind of seed idea, but really kind of creating the characters and their emotional arc and growth beyond that was what really was the most fun for me in writing the book.
Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about these women, right? So, and I will warn our viewers that we've got spoilers ahead. So if you haven't read the book, maybe you want to stop listening now, but we are going to reveal some important plot points here. But let's talk about these women because, of course, I think that's one of the things that is really, really appealing about the book is it's very much suspense. There's lots of drama, but it's also very human. These are very realistic women. And I think a lot of what we're seeing today in suspense and in thriller books is the kind of unreliable narrators. And instead, you've created two very reliable narrators. We believe these women. We believe what is happening to them. They're telling us the truth. They're very realistic. They're very relatable. So let's talk a little bit about the creation of them and kind of how you came up with them. So first of all, let's talk about Eva. So this question had come up from one of our library listeners. So why did you choose a life of crime for Eva?
I needed it to be different from what Claire was running from. I didn't want there to be two abusive men in the book and having them both be like women on the run from bad relationships. But I also needed to have a real real need why Eva wanted to vanish, because it's totally unbelievable that, Claire would find herself talking to a stranger who just was willing to do this for her. So Eva needed to have her own motivation. And in fact, in the chapter where they actually trade the plane tickets, Eva's manipulating Claire all the way through. The reader knows that, but Claire doesn't know that. And I don't even think Claire knew it even by the end. I don't think she knew that Eva had manipulated her. I think Claire believed that it was her idea, and which is, I think, why she had so much guilt after the fact, because she felt responsible. But, I wanted Eva to be in danger so that when Claire decides to hide out at Eva's house, Claire is now in danger. So Claire is in danger from two different directions, from her husband and from the people who are after Eva, who have noticed
that was a great extra layer of suspense. That was really, that was
it's
really well done.
Thinking about, what would it be like for Claire to, go into Eva's house and live there? Like what kinds of, what problems would she run into, and I'm thinking about the neighbors, and I'm thinking about the people who are kind of in Eva's everyday life, noticing like, you don't live there, who are you, so I needed to handle all of these things, but I also needed to make sure that the people who are after Eva were watching her from afar and kind of tracking her in a way that Claire might not notice right away. The reader will know. And the reader, I think, does know very early on that what is going on in Eva's life is certainly not anything that's on Claire's radar, which also, I think, adds to the tension.
Yes. So did you ever have a moment where you wanted to choose a happier ending for Eva?
Yes, I did. I absolutely did. I would have loved for Eva to have gotten off the plane, but I had the ending in my head very, very early on in drafting, and it just felt the most true to me. That, life doesn't always give you the happy ending that you want. And, as the creator of both characters and caring deeply about both characters, I still felt like I needed to pick which one got her happy ending, And unfortunately, Eva didn't, because I couldn't figure out a way to get her off the plane. I just couldn't logistically figure it out. I had a flight attendant write me an email via my website that basically said, there's no way, no way, I don't care how cheap the airline is, they don't skip the head count ever, 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 ever. And then she emailed me immediately and said, I didn't read far enough. Okay. And, I just think that it would have been nice. And I could have written it that way. I could have written the book where, Vista Air doesn't do the head count. And that could be a way that Eva gets off the plane, but it just didn't feel real to me. Eva is a drug dealer. She has kids beat up for $600. She, made bad choices, and she was kind of cornered into a bad place. But at the end of the day, like, Eva's a drug dealer, and those were choices that she made. These were people that she chose to affiliate herself with. I've had, lots of reader messages, and, one of the things that people say is, she could have made other choices, and, yeah, she could have, but, she was also 20 at the time, and not fully formed, and not really thinking, the frontal lobe and all of that doesn't even come into, cause and effect until 26. So, you can't really blame her for doing what she did. But at the same time, I wanted the reader to have a lot of sympathy and empathy for her. I wanted the reader to understand and care about her and love her and want things for her. And yet, it doesn't always end the way you want it to end.
Yes. Well, I think, you did really this masterful job of sort of tricking the reader along. You had me convinced that she had gotten off that plane. You dropped enough about how, this is a, third-rate airline. They're always making mistakes. They just skip the head count. I actually stopped reading at one point to Google to see, how can you check into a plane? And there's a whole Reddit thread that says you cannot, there's no way to do it.
Yeah, I read it when it was all about frequent flyers who wanted the points, wasn't it? Yeah, they were trying to get the points. And any way for me to scan onto the flight but not be on it so that I could
But
get
yes, that's
and
the first
like
result that comes up.
they just got reamed. You understand what would happen if you did that? We all have to deplane and wait there,
Yes.
you know. And again, it's just that, I just can't, if the head count doesn't match, everybody has to get off the plane and
Yeah.
report again. So there just wasn't any way to do that
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I thought it was great because it was a surprise to me, the very end, when I was like, oh no, she really didn't make it. But so good job with that. So let's switch over to Claire for a second then. So Claire, so did you kind of like feel a responsibility to write a story that kind of ties into the Me Too movement a little bit? Claire is this woman who is emotionally and physically abused by her husband, and he is very well known from a very well known politically connected family, and she kind of is stuck. So did you like, this is a really good moment in time to be writing a story like this, because again, it goes back to that this is very realistic, this is very relatable, this could be a story that we're watching on 2020 or we're reading about in the news. So how did that kind of become important to you as you were writing Claire's story?
it didn't originally start as something I wanted to tie into, mostly because when I had the idea for the book, it was at least 5 or 6 years ago. So the media
Oh,
hadn't really emerged yet. It was sort of one of those lovely coincidences of world events sort of dovetailing nicely with the book idea that I've already been working on. So it just, but in the revision process, that was when I really started seeing the connection as things were happening in the news, and the stuff that where it all started in Hollywood and how everybody was coming forward and speaking out against these powerful studio heads. I was interested in that, and then when I was revising, it was right in the middle of the Kavanaugh, confirmation
mm,
in Congress, and it was sort of the first moment when I think a lot of women realized there's been a lot of talk about Me Too and believing women, but like
right,
that was really the test to see, are we really believing women? And like, no, we're not believing women. And so
right,
that to me felt like a really pivotal moment of, wait a minute, if we're saying that we care about these things and we're saying that we believe women, like that was a really good opportunity for us to actually believe women. And we didn't. So, or we as a country, not
mm-hmm,
individually, because I do think that there are a lot of people out there who do. And so I wanted to write a book that really highlighted a lot of these inequities that we still have, that women's credibility is still questioned, still every day, just in the way that we speak about women, the way that, women are perceived as too ambitious or too bossy or too emotional. These are things that erode at women's credibility in some very like microaggression level ways. So I definitely was very interested in watching how this played out in the news in 2017, 2018, as I was revising this book and making sure that it rang true for me, for readers, for women. And that was partly also why I veered away from the unreliable female narrator, in that I
mm-hmm,
feel as an author, I have an obligation to write strong female leads. We need more of those in adult fiction. There's plenty of them in middle grade and young adult, but I think we need more of them in adult fiction. I think that as an author, as a mother, as a teacher, it's my responsibility to write women that we want to see in the world and that we want, to have perpetuated. So
agreed. Yeah, that's great. So I've got some more questions from some of our readers here, actually. We've got a question from the Rolling Hills Consolidated Library in Missouri, who wants to know, what real life crime story has intrigued you or inspired you while you were writing this, or anything else that you've written?
I love listening to true crime podcasts.
Okay.
Missing people, serial killers. Like, I don't want to write about those things because they're too scary, but I do love listening to them. They do give me some really good sort of character studies, that there are really people out there who have these insane stories. And, I just find them fascinating, and they're just fun to listen to as I think through plot points, and they help inform my constant quest to make things worse for my characters whenever I possibly can. So they help kind of keep my mind in a dark place because I'm not really a
Mhm.
dark person. I love Danny Shapiro's Family Secrets podcast. That
Mhm.
one is really good at giving ideas for plot twists because all of these family secrets that she talks about, the people, the memoirists that she interviews on this podcast, they're all basically living through a massive plot twist in their life. You know, the discovery that the father that you thought was your father wasn't your father, the discovery that, your spinster aunt who, lived a life alone was actually worked for the CIA. Like stuff like that where you're like, whoa, that's incredible. So just kind of listening to those is also a lot of fun for me. So that's really my inspiration in a lot of these situations. And also just my general paranoid, what if the person in the car next to me has a body in the trunk kind of
Yes.
that guy looks a little sketchy. I bet he has like a body in the trunk or something, or he's on his way to rob a bank, or I don't know.
Right. I do that too. I actually I have what I like to do. You're gonna think I'm crazy now, but what I like to do is if I'm driving past like really secluded or wooded areas,
Oh,
I
yeah.
sort of make a mental note and I'm like, if I ever needed to hide a body, I bet I
Yeah.
could do it right there.
I do that too. No lights, no people. There's an overhanging
Right?
monster that might hide a body for several days. That would be a good.
Right? Like
Yeah.
exactly. So it's funny that sometimes, real life can inform fiction, and that's I think that's what makes for really good reading, frankly. Um, so we have another question from the Messenger Public Library of North Aurora, and they would like to know: do you do research first, or do you jump straight into your writing?
I generally jump straight into my writing, but then I research as I need to. So
Okay.
a lot of times I will leave a note in the manuscript, like check this out or research this. So when I had Claire getting a fake ID and passport, I didn't let that slow me down as far as pushing the plot forward. I just made a note for myself, like I need to figure out how she would do this.
Got it.
Where would she get it? From whom?
Mhm.
How
Mhm.
much would it cost? How easy are they to get? All of these questions I would just put as a note in the manuscript so that when I go back to revise, those are the things that I can flesh out. Because a lot of times what will slow you down when you're drafting a new book is all the research that you need to do, and you find all of these little rabbit holes to dive down into, and then the next thing you know, 5 days have passed and you haven't written anything.
Got it.
And while that can be helpful in some ways as you sort of flesh out the plot and flesh out the characters, it can really slow you down as far as just getting something on paper. And for me, I always work better when I have a draft to revise, even if it's horrible. And the first draft of The Last Flight was terrible. Terrible. I mean, I, opened the book in the wrong place, and I had the resolution completely different. And, there was very little from that first draft that remained in the
Oh,
final.
really?
Very little.
Interesting. Interesting.
The basic bones of it are the same. Claire gets on
Mhm.
an airplane, she trades tickets with somebody, lands in Oakland, stays at her house, bad things happen. I mean, that's sort of, but the resolution was completely different. In the first draft, I think I had her flying back to New York to confront Rory and having this like confrontation in Central Park, and then later in a hotel room with the woman he was having an affair with. Like things like that just, my readers and my agents and people were like, yeah, no, not feeling it, do something different. This isn't working. So a lot of those things just sort of happen as you familiarize yourself with the story and with the characters and what kind of realistic choices are and what works and what doesn't work.
Mhm. So how long did it take you then from start to finish, from kind of getting the idea to creating this initial draft to then doing all your edits and revisions and then finally publication? I know people always want to know how long that takes.
It took me about 3 years, I want to say, from
Okay.
start to finish. I started really drafting in earnest. I mean, I might have had a couple chapters written in like the spring of 2017, but I really didn't start writing until probably the fall of 2017. And I had a
Okay.
draft that I thought was pretty decent by January of 2018. So this draft was very fast for me. It took me maybe 4 or 5 months to write,
Hmm.
but then was just not working in 100 different ways, to the point where, it took me about a year and a half to get it to where it was ready to go out to editors. So the revision process was really where I spent the bulk of my time. I don't know yet whether I can change that. I think that's just sort of how I work, as I realize
Okay.
as I'm working forward with my third book, that I really kind of get stymied when I overthink and try to go back and revise before I know where the book is going.
Mm,
It's too hard for me. And then I get stuck and I don't know what I'm doing. And so part of the work, I think, is just pushing through and finishing the draft no matter what. Even if the ending you're like, oh, this is terrible, it's never going to stay. Doesn't matter. Just get it down.
got it. Got it. Let's kind of continue in this vein. There's another question from a listener or a reader who wants to know. So you've got these two different women in two different storylines, and the way it's laid out in the book is everybody, we go chapter to chapter, viewpoint to viewpoint. So can you tell us a little bit about the way that you wrote? Did you write Claire's story all the way through and Eva's story all the way through and then mash them together? Or did you write half and half? Or tell us a little bit some of your strategies used in writing the narrative as it flowed.
I wrote them back and forth. I mean, I wrote straight from beginning to end and tried to go back and forth between the characters as much as I could. But then once I got the first draft down, then I really spent a significant amount of time alone with each character and just her chapters, making sure I fleshed out the story arc for each of them emotionally as well as the actual plot, so that each one felt well rounded, each one felt like it had a clear crisis, each one felt like it had a clear resolution. And then I put them back together again. So that was pretty tricky because I needed to match up the chapters so that both
Mm,
characters were reaching a crisis around the same
hmm.
time, which
Right.
was a little tricky. I had to move a few things around and kind of combine a few Claire chapters and combine a few Eva chapters, or take a couple Claire chapters apart to create more Claire chapters to fit in between Eva chapters to make it work. It was a lot of note cards on the floor or on the wall being moved around, and and a lot of just reading it again and again and again.
How did you keep yourself? Claire is a very distinct character. Eva is a very distinct character. They have very different personalities. They have very different lives. How did you kind of find the voice for each woman and sort of keep it straight?
It helps that Eva was told in the past in third person and Claire is
Hmm.
first person. That helped a lot, just in my own mind. But I also struggled a lot with kind of getting close enough to Eva. For a lot of my early drafts, my readers kept saying, like, I just don't connect with Eva for some reason. So I really had to kind of dive into her psyche and dive into ways to get closer to her. And so one of the things that I did was I ended up writing a lot of Eva's chapters by hand in first person so that I could
Oh, really?
get inside her head and really
Okay.
inhabit her. And then
Hmm.
I transferred what I went to go put what I had created into the computer. I changed it out to third person past, just so that, but it worked for me. It worked for me.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think it works for the readers too. I think that really, just from talking about this, you can really tell how much work has been put into creating these characters and creating this story. And it really comes through, for the reader. I think that's why these women come across as so realistic and the story comes across as so interesting, is you obviously have put a lot of care into your writing. So kudos to you for that. So that's fascinating to write it in the first person and then switch it. And did that take you a long time, or once you had it done, it was in, how does that work as a writer? That's the real work, isn't it?
It's actually a lot easier to do when you're taking something that you've written on a piece of paper and transferring it into the computer. It's a lot harder if you're taking an existing piece of writing in the computer and going through and finding every I and changing to That's really hard. So it actually wasn't very hard for me to just transcribe it as I typed it in to third.
Got it.
Wasn't that?
Oh, that's very cool. I think people will really like that little, that's a great little tidbit there. So continuing along that line, in general, what's your writing process like? Do you get up and set yourself a time for the day to write? Do you have a number of words you're supposed to write every day? And has any of that changed at all? Is it harder or easier to write during this kind of odd pandemic quarantine time? Tell us a little bit just about your writing process in general.
I thought it would be easier. I mean, I'm not having to get up and leave the house every day by 6:45. I'm not having to, get kids up and out the door. We have a much easier sort of peace in the morning. So I thought I'll be able to, work at least another hour. I usually write from about 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. So I was thinking I could easily write from 4 to 7 or even 7:30, and still be able to get kids up and give them breakfast and get everybody started during school year kind of on their work for the day. That's not really how it turned out though. I think my body is really conditioned after many, many years of just, I have about a 2-hour attention span on whatever task I'm doing. And after 2 hours, unless I'm on a deadline and that changes everything, I really can't push past that very often. I can come back to it later in the morning, and I often will do that. But I generally like to get my writing work done first, even before I exercise or anything else, because then it's out of the way and I sort of feel a sense of accomplishment, like, oh, the hard part's done for today. The rest of the stuff I can just, do. But the writing work can be hard. I always, because it's early in the morning when I write, I'm very tired when I wake up. I have a giant pot of coffee and I, get started with that. But I always set myself a task for the next day before I'm done. So every morning when I'm finishing up my writing for the day, whether it's I have enough words in the new draft, or if I've revised the pages that I set for myself to revise, I always make sure I set a task for myself for tomorrow so that I don't have to think about it in the morning when I'm still kind of half asleep. I have it written down in my notebook and I'm like, oh, right, I'm reading these pages and I'm revising them. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'll even go so far as to print the pages out if I'm revising, so that I don't have to do that in the morning, because when you wake up, any extra step that you have to take makes it that much harder. So even if it's like I have to open my laptop and print them, I don't know if I can do that. So really making sure that everything is in place, everything is ready to go, so that all I have to do is open my eyes, drink my coffee, pick up my pen or pick up my laptop and just get to work.
Got it. All right. Well, I know listeners will enjoy hearing about that. Everyone wants to know kind of like what the author's process is like. So thanks for sharing your writing day with us. And so we'll go ahead and wrap it up then, along those kinds of lines with sort of the last question of what is next for you? I know your fans will want to know if you have another book coming out, when you think that might be. Can you give us a little hint? Are you going to be, is suspense your thing? Have you ever thought about, writing something different, or is the next thing from you going to be in that domestic suspense vein again?
I'm definitely going to stick with suspense. I think those are funnest stories to write. It might not be like a straight up thriller with like, a bad guy on your trail in the same way that Clara and Eva had. But I do love the idea of suspense. The next book that I'm working on, I don't know when it will be published. I'm still on the first draft and just away on it. It's about family secrets, and it's the story of a struggling writer who is the daughter of a famous literary icon father who only ever published one book, but the world knows him. Like, he's a very well-known figure. He dropped suddenly and unexpectedly, without any explanation, out of public life in 1983. and she's written a memoir kind of talking about that last year with her family. But as she comes to discover the secrets that he was guarding were much, much bigger and more explosive than even his legacy. So that's what's next.
That sounds great. I will be first in line to want to read that one. It sounds good just from that little tidbit. So thank you so much for chatting with me today, Julie. It was really great to hear about your process and the characters for the book. So I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. And I'm just so thrilled to have been a part of the book club, and libraries are just such a safe and happy place for me from childhood onward. So I was thrilled that we had this opportunity to do Murder at the Library.
Yes, awesome. So yes, thank you to everyone who's been watching. Thanks for joining us for Murder at the Library, and make sure to join the next one, which is happening Wednesday, August 26th at 7 o'clock Eastern. Once again, sponsored by Sourcebooks and Baker and Taylor. So stay safe and happy reading, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.